Picture this. A mother, standing at the edge of everything she has ever known. Behind her, infinite light, infinite peace, a realm so complete that nothing is missing, nothing is broken, nothing is lost. Ahead of her, darkness, the unknown, the boundary no one was supposed to cross. She doesn't cross it out of ambition. She doesn't cross it out of pride. She crosses it because she loves, because she wants to create, because something in her, the deepest, most ancient impulse in the universe, reaches toward life. And what she creates in that darkness will become the world you live in. Welcome to Weird World Files, where history meets the unexplained. I'm glad you're here for this one, because this episode is unlike anything we've covered before, not because it's darker, not because it's stranger, but because at the center of it is something unexpectedly human. Grief, love, a mistake made not from evil, but from longing, and consequences so vast they reach all the way down to you, sitting where you are right now, watching this. In our last episode, we looked for the door out of the constructed reality the Gnostics described. We walked through the 5-step escape plan they left behind. We asked whether the oldest texts on Earth contained something far more than philosophy, a practical map of consciousness drawn by people who somehow knew. And at the end of that episode, I planted a seed. Her name is Sophia. Today, we follow that seed all the way down, the full myth, the full tragedy, and hidden inside it, something that I think will change how you understand your own existence. If deep investigations into the unexplained and the suppressed are your thing, hit subscribe and drop a like on this video. Tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far these files travel. And as always with our videos, the visuals are here to set the atmosphere. The story lives in the narration. Now, let's begin. To understand what Sophia lost, we first have to understand what she had. The Gnostics described a realm they called the Pleroma. The word is Greek, and it means fullness, completion, a state in which nothing is absent, nothing is lacking, nothing is broken, not a physical place, not a location you could point to on any map, more like a condition of being so total, so whole, that the very concept of emptiness becomes meaningless. Within the Pleroma existed what the Gnostics called the aeons, divine emanations of the true God, the highest source, the monad, the one from which everything ultimately flows. Think of the aeons the way you might think of rays from a sun. They are not separate from the source. They are expressions of it, each one carrying a quality of the divine, wisdom, truth, grace, understanding, radiating outward in a kind of living, luminous architecture. And the youngest of these aeons, the one closest to the outer boundary of the Pleroma, was Sophia. Her name, in Greek, means wisdom, and the Gnostic texts describe her as the most curious of the divine emanations, the one who asked the most questions, the one who pressed closest to the edge of things, drawn by a longing to understand that the higher aeons, comfortable in their perfect, unquestioning light, simply didn't share. She was like a child at a window. The others were content inside the warmth of the house, but Sophia had her face pressed to the glass, watching the dark outside, wondering, what else is there? What exists beyond what I can see? This isn't a flaw the Gnostics describe in her. It's the thing that makes her recognizable. It's the quality that makes her, of all the divine beings in the Gnostic cosmos, the most achingly, unmistakably human. And now we come to the moment that changed everything. The Apocryphon of John, one of the most detailed cosmological texts found in the Nag Hammadi library, that extraordinary collection of Gnostic manuscripts buried in the Egyptian desert and lost for 16 centuries, describes what Sophia did with a kind of quiet devastation. She wanted to create. Not in defiance of the source, not to challenge the monad, but because creation, the act of bringing forth life from light, is what the monad itself does. It is the most fundamental impulse in the divine realm. And Sophia, the youngest Aeon, full of longing and love and an overwhelming desire to participate in that act, tried to do it herself. Without her consort, without the paired Aeon whose presence would have balanced and completed the act, without the consent of the higher source. Not because she was reckless, not because she was rebellious, because she wanted to give. The Valentinian Gnostic tradition, one of the richest streams of Gnostic thought, describes her motivation as an intense longing to comprehend the depth of the Father, to know the unknowable, to reach toward the source the way the source itself reaches outward. The very impulse that generates existence turned inward, aimed at something just beyond her reach. Her act wasn't ambition. It was love. The same love that made the universe. The only difference, she tried to do it alone. And the cosmos, it seems, does not permit creation in isolation. What Sophia brought forth was not what she intended. The Apocryphon of John describes the moment with a stark, almost brutal precision that has haunted me since I first read it. The text says that what came forth from Sophia's act was imperfect, different in appearance from her, formed in the wrong conditions, in the dark beyond the Pleroma, without the balancing presence of her consort, without the light of the higher realms to shape it properly. It had the form of a lion-faced serpent. Eyes of fire, a body of contradictions, power without wisdom, will without understanding. It carried within it a fragment of Sophia's own divine light, because it had come from her. But it had no knowledge of the realm that light came from, no memory of the Pleroma, no awareness that anything existed beyond itself. And Sophia looked at what she had made and was horrified. Think about that for a moment. Not the theology, not the cosmology, the human reality of that moment. You create something. You reach toward life with everything you have, out of love, out of longing, out of the most fundamental impulse in existence, and the first thing you see is a monster. Not just any monster. Your monster. Something that carries your own light inside it, twisted, trapped, unrecognizable. The text, called On the Origin of the World, another of the Nag Hammadi manuscripts, uses a word for what Sophia created that cuts right through any attempt at comfortable interpretation. It calls the being an abortion. The Greek word is ektroma, an unformed thing, a birth that went wrong. And then, and this is the detail that I keep returning to, Sophia didn't destroy it. She couldn't. He was still hers. So she did what any mother would do when confronted with something she cannot undo and cannot bear for the world to see. She wrapped him in light. She placed him on a throne. She surrounded him with a cloud of luminous shadow, and she hid him. Hidden so completely that none of the other Aeons would see what she had done. Hidden so completely that the being himself would grow up with no awareness that anything existed beyond the darkness he occupied. One act of mercy, one instinct of protection. And in doing so, she handed him a kingdom. Now, she gave this being 3 names, and I want you to sit with these, because they are not just labels. They are a grief encoded into language, a mother's full reckoning with what she had created, pressed into 3 words. The first name, Yaldabaoth, derived from Aramaic roots that scholars have interpreted in various ways, child of chaos, begetter of the heavens, a name that speaks to origin, to the uncontrolled act that brought him into being. The second name, Saklas, an Aramaic word meaning the fool. She named her own child the Fool, not in cruelty, in devastating clarity. She could see exactly what he was, a being of real power with no wisdom, no self-knowledge, no awareness of his own nature. The word is a diagnosis, not an insult. The third name, Samael, the blind god, or in some translations, the god of the blind, a being who cannot see the light he came from, cannot see the prison he inhabits, cannot see the greater reality that surrounds him on every side. Every time those names appear in Gnostic texts, and they appear many times, they carry Sophia's original sorrow inside them. She named him, she saw him clearly, and she had to live with both. Here is the parallel I want you to hold for a moment, because this is one of those places where the ancient and the modern collapse into each other in an unsettling way. Consider how many of the systems that govern our world today were built by people who believed, genuinely believed, that they were the only authority that mattered, that nothing existed above or beyond their understanding, that their reality was the whole reality. Institutions, ideologies, structures of power that have declared, in various ways and at various times, I am the only truth. There is nothing beyond me. Sackless, the fool, a being of real power with no awareness of its own blindness. The Gnostics weren't just writing cosmology, they were writing a warning about the nature of authority that refuses to look upward. When Sophia created Yaldabaoth and then hid him in the darkness beyond the Pleroma, she didn't just lose an offspring. She lost part of herself. The divine light that had animated her act of creation, her own fragment of the Pleroma's radiance, was now trapped inside Yaldabaoth, carried in a being who had no understanding of what he was carrying, and as Yaldabaoth, isolated, ignorant, convinced of his own supreme authority, began to exercise his power and create, that light began to scatter into every act of creation he performed, into every layer of material reality he constructed, into every world he built. The Apocryphon of John describes Yaldabaoth as inheriting Sophia's power, a power he uses to generate the material cosmos, the heavens, the elements, the structure of the physical world. All of it built by a being of real creative force, but no wisdom, real power, but no memory of where that power came from. And this is where something profound happens in the Gnostic story, something that elevates it far beyond mythology. Yaldabaoth creates the human body. He and the archons, the lower authorities that serve him, construct the physical form with extraordinary care. But they discover something they did not anticipate. They cannot make it live. The body lies there, complete in its construction, perfectly formed, but inert, empty, without whatever animating principle turns matter into a living, breathing, conscious being. The archons don't have that. They can build the house, but they can't light the fire inside it. And here, Sophia moves. Working through intermediaries, through the light of the higher realms reaching down into the chaos, Sophia arranges a deception. She guides Yaldabaoth, through a whisper, through an impulse he believes is his own, to breathe into the human form, to transfer the divine light he has been carrying unknowingly since his birth, to pour it into the clay body lying before him. He thinks he is demonstrating his power. He is handing over his mother's stolen light. The moment Yaldabaoth breathes, the human form opens its eyes. And inside that form, from that moment forward, burns a fragment of Sophia's original divine light, not placed there by the Demiurge, not part of his system, not subject to his authority, planted by a mother who had lost everything and used what remained to hide something precious where the jailer would never find it. The Gnostics called this the divine spark. And here is the line in these texts that I find most extraordinary, the line that crosses 2,000 years and lands directly in the present moment. The Gnostics said, that nameless longing, that pull towards something you cannot name, something no achievement or possession or relationship quite satisfies, that sense of being slightly too large for the life you're living, that quiet, persistent feeling that you came from somewhere else and that somewhere else is still waiting. That is not your imagination. That is Sophia's light, still trying to find its way home, through you. She lost everything in one unguarded moment of love, And with what little remained, she turned her catastrophe into a rescue mission. She planted herself inside every human being who would ever live. The prison has a secret door, and she hid the key inside the prisoners. But Sophia's story does not end with that act of hidden grace. If anything, it gets darker before it gets lighter. The text known as the Pistis Sophia, a lengthy and remarkable Gnostic manuscript, different in character from the Nag Hammadi texts, written in the form of a dialogue between Jesus and his disciples after the resurrection, is dedicated almost entirely to Sophia's suffering, her descent, her imprisonment, and her long, agonizing cry for rescue. The name of the text itself tells you something. Pistis Sophia, faith, wisdom, or wisdom in faith. A being who has lost almost everything, but has not stopped believing that the light she came from will come for her. The text describes Sophia being dragged down, pulled from whatever position she held in the cosmos after the birth of Yaldabaoth, and drawn into the chaos below the aeons, the dark, formless realm presided over by what the text calls the lion-faced power, an emanation of her own creation, come back to torment her. The rulers of the chaos surround her. They strip away her light, fragment by fragment, and take it for themselves. Her power weakens, her voice grows thin, the distance between her and the Pleroma she came from grows vast and cold. And she cries out 13 times. The Pistis Sophia records these 13 repentances, the metanoias, in full. They are not abstract theological declarations. They are raw. They are desperate. They are the voice of a being in genuine anguish, reaching toward a light she can no longer see clearly. She says she is in the midst of all the rulers and authorities, and they persecute her without ceasing. She says her power has become weak. She says she has become like a material substance cast down. In the 7th repentance, she says her time has perished, that she has become, in her own words, like a being of the darkness. Read as mythology, these passages are striking. Read as the testimony of a consciousness in genuine distress, as a record of what it feels like to be far from your source, surrounded by forces that want your light and will take it if they can. They become something else entirely. But here is the detail in the Pistis Sophia that I want you to hold most closely, because it changes the entire moral architecture of Sophia's fall. She didn't descend into the chaos by mistake. She didn't lose her footing in some cosmic accident. She was tricked. The text describes a being called Orthodes, the self-willed one, an arrogant power aligned with the chaos, who arranged for a false light to appear below Sophia. A light that looked, from where she stood, exactly like the light of the Pleroma, exactly like the light she had been trying to return to all along. She saw it. She recognized what she believed was the true light she had been searching for, and she descended toward it. It was a trap. The light was counterfeit, and by the time she understood that, she was already in the chaos, already surrounded, already losing fragments of herself to the rulers who had been waiting for exactly this moment. She did not fall from pride. She fell because she was shown something that looked like home, and she ran toward it. How many times, in how many different ways, has that same mechanism been used? Show something that resembles what you're longing for, something that almost looks like meaning, like connection, like truth. And watch what happens. The longing itself becomes the mechanism of the trap. The Gnostics saw this clearly. They encoded it in Sophia's story. They were saying, be careful of the light that costs nothing to look at. Real light changes you. Counterfeit light just takes what you have. And then, from inside the darkness, something unexpected happens. Yaldabaoth has a son, a being named Sabaoth, an archon born into the hierarchy of the false creator, raised in the darkness of the constructed cosmos, with no reason to question any of it. But Sabaoth hears something. Sophia's voice, crying out from the chaos below, 13 times, reaching upward toward the light she has lost, reaches even him. Through the walls of the cosmos his father built, through the layers of constructed reality designed precisely to prevent this kind of signal from passing through. And Yaldabaoth listens. The text from On the Origin of the World describes what happens next with a quiet power that I find almost difficult to read. Yaldabaoth hears Sophia's repentance. He is so moved that he condemns his own father, the Demiurge, the being who created him, the only God he has ever known, and turns to worship the light above. Sophia, in response, lifts Yaldabaoth to the seventh heaven, above all the other archons, and gives him a domain of his own. The tyrant's own son, turned by a mother's cry. The light she scattered, the same light that animated every human being, was so persistent, so fundamental, so inextinguishable, that even the children of the jailer could feel it and turn toward it. Even in her lowest moment, in the deepest part of the chaos, with her power nearly spent, Sophia's love reached across the entire structure of the constructed cosmos and redeemed at least one soul that was never meant to be redeemable. The Pistis. Sophia does something unusual that most people who haven't read it closely don't realize. It places one figure above all the disciples in terms of understanding. Not Peter, not John, not any of the male disciples who would later found institutions and write doctrines and build structures of authority in their names. It places Mary Magdalene at the center of the dialogue. In the Pistis Sophia, Mary asks more questions than all the other disciples combined. She understands what Jesus is saying in a way that repeatedly leaves the others behind. The text says she is blessed above all women, that she will be the fullness of fullnesses, that her spirit is attuned to something the others are still reaching for. The Gnostics saw in Mary Magdalene a direct echo of Sophia. The same quality, that deep, almost unbearable longing to understand, to see through the surface of things, to press toward the truth even when it costs something. The same instinct that drove Sophia to the edge of the Pleroma, alive now in the most misunderstood woman in the New Testament. And consider what the Church spent considerable effort doing in the centuries after the Gnostic texts were condemned, not just burying the texts, not just suppressing the cosmology, but systematically obscuring Mary Magdalene, reducing her, reframing her, making her smaller and less significant with each passing century. If you wanted to erase Sophia's echo from the official record, where would you start? You would start with the woman the Gnostics said carried her light. But Sophia's echo doesn't only appear in ancient texts, it may be appearing right now, in research facilities, in ceremony spaces, in hospital rooms at the precise moment the body gives out, and something, whatever we truly are beneath all of this, begins to move toward whatever comes next. And what's remarkable is that two completely different states of consciousness, arriving through completely different pathways, are reporting back with something strikingly similar. The first is something most people have heard of: near-death experiences, documented in peer-reviewed research across tens of millions of accounts worldwide. People who have returned from the threshold of physical death, clinically gone, then brought back, and described with extraordinary consistency the same thing. A presence. Not always a figure, not always something with form, but a presence, described repeatedly as feminine or carrying an unmistakably feminine quality. Overwhelming, ancient, radiating a love so complete, so unconditional, that multiple experiences across decades of documented research have reached for the same specific phrase to describe it: the love of a mother. Now consider the second pathway, one that mainstream culture has spent decades trying to categorize and has never quite managed to explain away. DMT dimethyltryptamine, a compound that occurs naturally in the human body and in hundreds of plants across the planet. Researchers have called it the spirit molecule. Indigenous cultures in the Amazon have worked with it ceremonially for thousands of years, believing it to be a doorway, not to imagination, but to a layer of reality that ordinary waking consciousness simply cannot access. In recent years, science has begun to take the experiences it produces seriously. A peer-reviewed study published in Nature's Scientific Reports analyzed nearly 4,000 DMT experiences in detail. What they found was not random, not chaotic, not the scattered, unpredictable imagery you might expect from a compound affecting brain chemistry. It was consistent, strikingly, repeatedly, across thousands of independent accounts from people who had never compared notes, consistent. Nearly half of all participants reported encountering what they described as an autonomous being, something that felt entirely separate from themselves, something conscious, intelligent, and unmistakably real. And the single most commonly reported entity across all of those thousands of accounts was a feminine presence. Not always visible, sometimes not a figure at all, just a presence, a felt reality, something that occupied the space with an awareness and an intention that left no doubt it was there. Several participants described it as an omnipresence, something that didn't arrive because it had always been there, waiting, aware. The emotions these people associated with this presence were not ambiguous. Love. Overwhelming, unconditional, almost unbearable love. Kindness that felt ancient. A sense of being known completely, without judgment, by something that had always known them. 80% of those who encountered these presences reported that the experience permanently changed their understanding of reality, not as a side effect, as the central, irreversible consequence of having been in the presence of something they could not explain and could not dismiss. And here is the detail I keep returning to. Many of these participants described not recognizing this presence the way you recognize a stranger. They described recognizing it the way you recognize something you had forgotten, as if the encounter wasn't an introduction. It was a reunion. Now consider what happens at the boundary of physical life itself. The moment the body stops functioning and something begins to move toward whatever comes next. Researchers studying near-death experiences have now documented accounts from tens of millions of people who have returned from that threshold, and across cultures, across religions, across centuries, certain elements appear again and again with a consistency that science has never fully resolved. The tunnel, the light, the life review, and the presence. Not always a figure, not always something with form, but a presence, described repeatedly as feminine or carrying an unmistakably feminine quality, overwhelming, ancient, and radiating a love so complete, so unconditional, that multiple experiences across decades of documented research have reached for the same specific phrase to describe it: the love of a mother. 69% of all documented near-death experiences involved an encounter with this kind of overwhelming love. And the people who returned from that threshold, atheists included, used language that the Gnostics would have recognized immediately. A love that doesn't judge, a love that has always been there, a love that feels, above everything else, like coming home. Two completely different states of consciousness, two completely different research traditions, thousands of independent accounts spanning decades and continents. The same feminine presence, the same overwhelming love, the same impossible, inexplicable sense of familiarity. The Gnostics said Sophia's light is inside every one of us, scattered into the human form by an act of love, hidden where the constructed reality could never find it. They said that when the soul finally passes through the boundary, when it leaves the material world behind, it begins to remember what it truly is. What if the presence that thousands of people encounter at that threshold, feminine, maternal, radiating a love beyond anything this world contains, is simply Sophia recognizing her own light? Coming to meet the fragment of herself that is finally, after everything, finding its way home. And now, we come to the end of Sophia's story, or rather to the part of it that has not yet ended. The Gnostics described an eschatological promise, a cosmic resolution toward which all of existence is slowly, painfully, inevitably moving. They called it the restoration, the return. The divine sparks that Sophia's light became scattered across every human being who has ever lived, buried inside the material form Yaldabaoth constructed, hidden from the archons who manage the reincarnation cycle, trapped in the loop of forgetting and returning. Those sparks are not lost permanently. They are finding their way back. Every human being who achieves gnosis, who wakes up, who remembers the source, who sees through the constructed reality and recognizes what they truly are, returns a fragment to Sophia, brings her one piece closer to what she lost in the moment she reached across the boundary of the Pleroma and tried to create alone. She has been waiting for 2,000 years. Possibly much longer if these texts are describing something that predates the language used to write them. Every time someone wakes up, she gets a piece of herself back. And when the last spark returns, she goes home. Think about what that means for a moment, not as theology, not as ancient cosmology from a tradition long since buried, but as a framework for understanding your own life. The Gnostics were saying, you are not a mistake, you are not an accident, you are not a random biological event trying to survive long enough to reproduce and then disappear. You are a fragment of divine light, placed inside this reality by a mother who loved so deeply that even her worst mistake became an act of extraordinary care. Every question you have ever asked that didn't have a comfortable answer, every moment of beauty that seemed too sharp to belong here, every time you felt, for just a second, that this world is not quite where you're from. That's not confusion. That's memory. If this episode opened something in you, if Sophia's story landed in a way that you're still sitting with, hit the like button and leave a comment. Tell me where in the world you're watching from and what stayed with you from today. I read every single one. And if you know someone who carries these kinds of questions, the deep ones, the ones that don't go away, share this with them. That's how these files travel. Subscribe if you haven't already. We are going somewhere very specific next, and you will want to be here for it. But before you go, a seed. Sophia hid her child in a cloud of light, so the other aeons would never see what she had made. She gave him a throne, she gave him a kingdom. And then she looked away. And in that darkness, alone, with no knowledge of the Pleroma, no memory of his mother, no awareness that anything existed beyond himself, he opened his eyes and said the words that would imprison every soul that would ever live. I am God, there is no other. Sophia's shame created a tyrant. Her mercy gave him power, and her silence let him build a prison out of the entire physical universe. Next time, we meet him. Yaldabaoth, the blind god, the fool, the false creator, the Demiurge. Your God. This is Weird World Files, where history meets the unexplained. I'll see you there. Thanks for watching.